There are many narrative stories in the Quran, and from what I understand, there is 4/5 of the narrative of the Quran is about the story of Moses, but there is very interesting stories other than Moses. Moses is dispersed again in different places, but one of the most interesting narratives in the Quran is the story of Yusuf or Joseph. And people love to read that surah and reflect upon that surah. And of course, there is a woman mentioned in the surah. And some of you might already know the Old Testament narrative, what happens with Joseph when he's in Egypt and living in the house of the important Egyptian official. I didn't have time to put pictures of everything, but there are Islamic manuscripts, even from Iranian Iranian art, showing the story. So he was, summarily, quickly, Joseph was, his brothers were jealous of him, threw him in a well, and then he was found by a caravan, brought to Egypt, raised in the household of an important Egyptian official, and then when he became of age, he was very handsome. And so the woman who was raising him, which is sort of his foster mother, suddenly was very attracted to him. So she tried to seduce him, and he was about to fall into the seduction, but then he was reminded that, no, God is watching, and I'd better not do that. So he stopped himself from falling into a problem. And then he tried to, run out the door. She ran after him. She grabbed him by his shirt. So she ripped the shirt. And then as this was happening, her husband comes in. So she suddenly changes and tells him, oh, look, he was trying to rape me. So the husband becomes confused. So somebody in the household comes and say, in the name of justice, I guess, well, check his shirt. If it's ripped from front, then yes, he was trying to rape her. But if it's, ripped from the back, she's the one who's trying to push him, pull him. So of course the shirt was already pulled from the back. So instead of cursing her, killing her, inner honor killing and so on, he just told her, something like, this is horrible, ask God for forgiveness, forget about it. But she did not forget about it. And the city women heard, meanwhile, there was no cell phones, but people could still go out and say, oh, did you hear what happened? So they were all saying, she was trying to seduce that boy, could you believe it? So she heard that, so she said, okay, I have a plan. So she invited all the women, gave them each, like the Quran, again, is not very clear, but people in the interpretation would say that she gave them each a plate with fruit and a knife. And, they were sitting comfortably, enjoying themselves, having tea. And then she told Joseph, come in. So Joseph started walking in, and she had dressed him in his finest clothes, and they all looked at him like, oh my God, he's so handsome. And they all cut their hands with the knife. So she said, see, do you see why, I'm doing what I was doing? So they said, yes, and now we're all interested. So, so this was going to be a group rape. So the poor Joseph said, no, I can't, get into this. So they told him the other option is you'll go into prison. So he said, fine, I'll go to prison. So he went to prison for 7 years. And finally he came out of prison, and he asked, before he came out, he said, ask the woman, to tell you the truth about me. So they confessed and said, no, he's never done anything wrong. And then the woman herself said, yes, it was me. I'm sorry. I was doing something wrong, and now I realize my mistake. And so in all of this, there is beauty that, the women, again, are not cursed. There is a chance for you to do something horrible and then repent and then be accepted, again, in the eyes of community and eyes of God. So at the end, justice prevails. There's many more details to the story of Joseph, but just in the sake of brevity, we can go on, and then you can ask more, inshallah, when we have a question-answer session. Of the stories that I love very much in the Quran, again, is the story of Prophet Moses, and then there's, how his mother had to give him up, and then the story of his sister, the story of in the Quran, it's the wife of the Pharaoh who adopted him, not the sister. And then later the daughters of Shu'aib, another prophet who, he helped the daughters and then married one of them. So again, the whole story is not found in one place. You have to look in different places. But again, when you read how it's presented, God is very compassionate, towards the women. For example, and again, we can find, the passages and could read them. A couple of years ago, I participated in an interfaith dialogue, and we talked. It was myself and a Christian minister and a Jewish rabbi, and we compared, the presentation of Moses and his mother both in the Quran and then the Old Testament. And it was very touching because in the Quran, again, there is this compassion toward the mother, that she was, after, it was revealed to her that she should put the baby in a basket, put him in the river so that he couldn't be protected. After she did that, she said, like, oh my God, what did I do? And she was almost going to give herself up. And then God said, فَرَبَطْنَا عَلَى قَلْبِهَا. Like God, made her strong so she wouldn't, and assured her that everything will be fine. And then, of course, she was reunited with Moses, and he grew up in the house of the Pharaoh. And the wife of the Pharaoh took him in, treated him very nicely, adopted him as a son. And then later, when he escaped from Egypt because, something had happened and he had to escape with his life, he helped a couple of women who were trying to give their sheep a drink, and then they were sitting to one side, so he came and said, why are you not, taking your sheep to water? And they said, because we wait until the male shepherds are gone. So he took it upon himself to help them. And then when they went home early, the father said, how come you're home early today? They said, there was a strong man who helped us. So he invited them in. And then after that, when he spoke to him and realized how good he was, he said, you're welcome to stay here, marry one of my daughters, and in return, because there has to be a dowry, he could work for the father for 7 to 10 years, I think, or something, something around. Like there was a bargain, and they agreed on the price. One of the very interesting women that's also mentioned in the Quran is the Queen of Sheba. Again, in the sources, they call her Bilqis, but that's not a name that comes from the Quran. It just probably comes from pre-Islamic tradition, and then it became accepted. Some facts from the Quran about this queen. She was a sovereign ruler of her people who were pagan, sun-worshipping nation, as was common, in the Middle East region, in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Yemen, and so on. People think she was from Yemen. And Saba, I guess, is in Yemen. And she ends up engaging in negotiations with Solomon, God's prophet, one of God's prophets. And, when you studied the 6 pillars of Iman, I guess it was emphasized to you that Muslims respect and believe in all the previous prophets, not just the Prophet Muhammad. And she, with interaction with Solomon, she realizes that he was given God-given powers of control over nature and its forces. And at the end of the story, she will join Solomon and become a Unitarian, believe in God, and submits to the fact that she was doing wrong by worshiping many gods. It's interesting that in the Hadith, there is a hadith that sometimes men would quote and say, the people who are ruled by women will not prosper. And in the Quran, there isn't that at all. And actually, when the woman, like Bilqis or Queen of Sheba, is criticized, it's not for being a woman, but actually it's because she and her people were not worshiping the one God. So it's usually monotheism that comes first, and that's the most important thing a human should look for. There are more than one chapter in the Quran, again, that mentions this story. There is a chapter called Saba, or, Saba is the name of the place where she would have resided. But the story is related more in the surah or the chapter of the ants. And it's very interesting that, the Quranic titles are very cute. Like one chapter is called the ants, and you wonder why, and then of course ants are miraculous individuals, and now there are Disney cartoons. I believe personally, and I guess myself and Khalid, we always have discussion that how Disney cartoons are actually filled with religious imagery and religious ideas more than people think. And but the ants are amazing in the creation of God. So there is one chapter with that name, but it has the story of Bilqis in it. So there is, for example, chapter 27, verse 18 to 19. The ants here are fearing Solomon's advance into their valley, and they don't want to be crushed. And then he heard them, and he was like, this is amazing that I can understand the language. So he could understand the language of the birds and the ants and lots of other creation. because he was granted supernatural power of control, as we mentioned before. And then he smiled when he heard the ant talk and asked God to, accept him among the righteous. So that's again a theme, taqwa, and is very important in Islam. That's a very important concept, and people want to be righteous because, you can be wealthy, but your wealth wouldn't do you any good in the end if you weren't righteous. Okay, so Sulaiman or Solomon, son of David or Dawood, is frequently mentioned in the Quran. Solomon was known for his wisdom and skillful administration of justice. He had esoteric knowledge and powers, and he was not a magician, but just was endowed with many, unnatural powers, or unnatural to us, supernatural, I should say. He could understand the speech of animals. He ruled the winds. He could make them blow, this way or that. He commanded the jinn to, follow his commands and order, and they labored for him. They built things for him. And his armies are thought to have been comprised of not just human beings, but jinn and birds, and I don't know if other creatures, but at least birds.
What are jinn?
Jinn are there is the angels who are all, created of light, and they have no free will, and they follow the commands and orders of God. And then there's the jinn, who are another creation, comparable sort of to human beings, but they live in a parallel world. They can see us and we cannot see them. And some of them are good and some of them are bad. And the leader of the bad ones is Shaitan, or Satan. He's called Iblis. He's called several things in the Quran: Iblis, Shaitan. I have the whole. I don't want to go through this quick. I'll just go through this slide, and then, because I find it very touching, and then I'll skip through some slides, and then we can come back to them later if we have time. He inspected the birds and said, "This is Solomon. What is the matter that I see not the hoopoe, or is he among the absentees? I will surely punish him with a severe torment or slaughter him unless he brings me a clear reason." So here he has this army of birds, and he was inspecting, and there's one that's missing, and he wondered where he went. So he got angry, but then the hoopoe came and said, "I have grasped," and then in the English translation say, "the knowledge of a thing which you have not grasped, and I have come to you from Saba or Sheba with true or great news." Naba Azim in Arabic. And here's the hoopoe. So if you've never seen the hoopoe, it's a relatively nice-sized bird that exists in Egypt. We call it in Arabic hudhud, and it eats, the pests, the insects, as you can see in the left-hand corner. And here's one of the birds mentioned in the Quran. So here he's telling him, "I found a woman ruling over them, and she had been given all things that could be possessed by any ruler of the earth, and she has a great or an enormous throne. I found her and her people bowing down to or worshipping the sun instead of Allah, and Satan or Shaitan has made their deeds fair seeming to them." So the idea is that Satan or Shaitan is always trying to tell you to do wrong things. So the same way he caused Adam and Eve to sin against God and end up, being forgiven but expelled from paradise. The role of Satan is to come and whisper to you, "Don't do this, don't do that. Why do you have to be good? It's easier to have fun." And then there's a cute, on the day of judgment, of course, he'll say, "I didn't force you to do this. You followed me on your own will. So don't blame me, blame yourself." So these people have no guidance. And then here, this is going into more details of the story, but I'll skip this. So here, she ends up coming and visiting the king, and he impresses her with because if he had the jinn, building stuff for him, he had very unusual things and glass on the floor, a floor made out of glass. And so finally when she saw all that, and she originally was like a mighty ruler in her own right, and so somebody who's mightier, she decided that she'd better surrender. So So here, this is like the Ifrit, or one of the jinnis promised Solomon that he'll bring her throne, to him in the wink of an eye. So before he opened his eyes, the throne was sitting there. So supernatural things, not just text messaging, but throne messaging. You bring your throne from overseas. So in a wink of an eye. So okay. So she comes, finds her throne, and so here 44 it says it was said to her, enter, and then she saw the glass surface with water underneath. So nowadays, like in Egypt, they're building hotels with glass room, like the floor of the room would be glass so people could see the fish, but it was done before, nothing new. And she saw it, and she thought it was a pool, so she tucked up her clothes, uncovering her legs, and then, the interpreters would take that and make so much fuss over it, and sometimes you wonder, why do they make fuss about the fact that she uncovered her legs? It's just like she uncovered her legs and that was immodest. But then you read in sources, and she had so much legs, she had so much hair on her leg because she didn't shave, and that was wrong, or her legs looked like, donkey hoofs because she was half genie, half woman, and they start going into like lots of unnecessary detail, but it's entertaining still. And so anyway, verily, the glass surface with water underneath it, paved smooth with slab of glass. And then she said, oh my Lord, verily I have wronged myself. I submit, in Islam together with Sulaiman to Allah, the Lord of the Alameen. So Rabb al-Alameen, the God of all the worlds, here because it's mankind and the jinn and everything else that exists that we might not or probably do not know of. Okay. Questions about Balqis before we move on? Okay, so the next point, that the book tries to make, and this is, or the Quran tries to make, is that there are women who are good, there are women who are bad. If you're married to a good man, that doesn't automatically take you to paradise. If you're married to a bad man, that doesn't automatically take you to hell. So there are examples of virtuous, exemplary women, and these are the wife of the Pharaoh, whereby there is a chapter that ends in saying actually that, like the example of virtuous woman is the wife of Pharaoh, where she asked God, to deliver her of the Pharaoh and all his, like probably, like he was taken as an example of somebody really bad and unjust and so on, and to grant her a place in paradise, build her a house in paradise, and also marry the mother of Jesus, and who was virtuous, guarded her chastity, and believed in God and his message. And then an example of women who went against God, on the other hand, are the wife of Noah and the wife of Lot. And it says that both had good husbands, but they went against them. So they end up being with those who will be punished. Okay, the chapter of Mary is the only chapter in the Quran named after a woman. And Mary is the only woman in the Quran mentioned by name. And there are other women, as you have been seeing, that are mentioned, but usually there will be the wife of so-and-so, or the daughter of so-and-so, or the mother of so-and-so, but without a personal name. And again, when you read the chapter of Mary, and she's mentioned both in her chapter of Mary and other places, and then there is another chapter called Al-Imran, that's her last name, and it says the story of how her mother wished for a baby, and then God gave her a baby, and she was happy, but then when she was delivered, it turned out it was a girl, not a boy, and she was hoping for a boy because the whole idea of having a baby was to have him serve in the temple, but she ended up dedicating the girl to the temple since that was her promise to God, and then God, made sure that she was raised well, and so even when she is about, as you know from Christian art probably, I wish I had time again to put more pictures, but the Annunciation, for example, the angel coming and telling her she's about to be pregnant, and she's very surprised and shocked. And the same imagery exists in the Quran, but again in narrative form, so she couldn't believe it. It's like, but I haven't been touched by a human, and I'm virtuous, and it's like, but this is God's will. And then when she was about to give birth, she said, I wish I was dead, and people forgot about me, because she felt like, oh my God, I'll come to my people with a baby, what would they think of me? And, again, she was assured that everything was fine, she doesn't have to do any work. When she's confronted by her people, all she has to do is point to the baby, and he will speak on her behalf. So in the Quran, actually, there is more miracles regarding Jesus that do not exist in the Bible, like Jesus speaking in the cradle. And then later there are other miracles as well. But he defended his mother.